This was an intelligence failure, predominantly by the Israelis, but also, quite frankly, by the United States and other regional actors. And that does have to be addressed, but it's not the most pressing. Right now, we'd be talking about the hostages. We, of course, have responsibility for American hostages. They are, it looks like, up to 100, many of them who are in Gaza right now. There are reports that they are in tunnels, and the tunnels are wired. So a traditional hostage rescue would be exceptionally difficult. And I think we're going to have to look at our partners in the region, Egypt, Qatar, that have some kind of leverage over Hamas to try to recover all the hostages, of course, including the Americans. So that's one effort I think that we would need to look at. The other effort we need to look at is just how involved Iran was in this operation. There's many indicators. It was a very complex operation. There was technical devices that brought down the communications in Israel. And obviously the weaponry and the equipment does indicate that Iran was involved. There's also been reporting that they were involved, but I think the IC needs to make a determination of just what their level of involvement is, because that would go toward potentially freezing the $6 billion that we just negotiated. And then, of course, what to be done against Iran, if anything, if they were directly responsible for this.
Well, let's start with the hostages part of this, because hostages have long been a part of, I don't want to say relations, but they've long been a part of the skirmishes between Palestinians and Israelis, namely on the Palestinian side. But prisoner swaps have often occurred, sometimes after years of holding hostages. But 150 hostages, Mick, this is a huge, huge number. What is Hamas looking for with holding these people hostage?
It is definitely a huge number, and the complexity of that from a military tile recovery would be enormous, on top of all the other things I already mentioned. So I think, what are they trying to get from that? They're probably going to use hostages as human shields. So every place that they think the Israelis are likely to strike and are striking right now, there may be a hostage, unfortunately, in those locations. They're going to use them for bargaining tools. They've already announced that they're going to start executing a hostage every hour on the hour. That would put a lot of pressure on Israel to mitigate what is coming, which is likely a ground invasion into Gaza. They're going to use them to try to recover their own prisoners that are held inside Israel, Hamas prisoners, for example, to try to recover them. They're going to use them, unfortunately, all against the law of armed conflict and every international protocol. Most of them are civilians, but obviously Hamas does not care about that.
Mick, I do wonder what you see as the biggest concern and risk for the world right now as we watch this. It's very easy, I think, sometimes, unfortunately, for folks who are not in it. We just talked with our Ethan Bronner, who is in Tel Aviv. He's our Israel bureau chief, and so is hearing it, seeing it firsthand. But the world has to be concerned about increasingly all of these geopolitical events, whether it's Ukraine or what's going on in Israel right now. What do you see as the biggest risk right now?
So I think the biggest risk regarding this conflict is that Iran decides to engage all of its proxies to come at every different angle into Israel. So if they initiate Lebanese Hezbollah, for example, or they just initiate themselves, they have about 150,000 rockets and missiles that they could launch into Israel, which would overwhelm any system, any air defense system, including the Iron Dome. And they also have militias in Syria. So if this happened, I think that the United States would become more and more likely to get directly involved militarily, as it could overwhelm the IDF and the security services in Israel. And that could lead to a much broader regional war, potentially bring in Iran directly. And that, of course, would be another war in the Middle East. And this one, very substantial.
We'll talk about that a little bit.
On top of what's happening right now.
Yeah, Mick, talk about that a little bit, in the U.S.'s involvement and what you, in your opinion, think that the U.S. should actually do, not just to rescue the Americans who've been held hostage, but also to make sure that parties, whoever they are at this point, are held accountable for what happened on Saturday and what continues to happen in Israel.
So militarily, the Pentagon announced the deployment of an aircraft carrier strike group, so the Gerald R. Ford strike group. That's one aircraft carrier, 2 destroyers, and 2 cruisers. It's substantial, and it's going to be parked right off of Israel, quite frankly. That is both a deterrence, so that if any other country might be thinking about jumping into this, they have to consider that presence right there, which is an incredible amount of military capability. The second thing that I think the United States is already doing, we keep pre-planned munitions pre-staged in Israel for our own purposes. Israel, I believe, has already asked you to be able to get access to that, and I think we're going to do that. That's a lot of ammunition that they can use in their ground offensive at a time when ammunition and weapons are in a shortage all around the world, like mostly from the Ukraine conflict. And the third is, I think, help them with intelligence. Obviously, that's been an issue, but they need intelligence to be able to accurately plan their upcoming ground invasion. And I think the United States can do that all before becoming directly involved. That is likely where the United States is right now.
Your Lobo Institute, it's all about conflicts, current, future, otherwise, and you advise clients about this and consult on this specifically at a time when we still have a war in Ukraine and now we have this. What's the message to global companies, to governments about security issues, international security issues at a time like today? And just got about a minute, unfortunately.
Yeah, certainly understand. So thanks for bringing up Lobo Institute. It is a group of people not only that were in the agency and the military, but also in the UN. For example, USAID. So it really covers the gamut of both your military types and your essentially humanitarian types. And that is really what the message is of Lobo Institute, is that it is not just one tool to help end conflicts, it's multiple tools. For example, if the economic conditions in some countries don't improve, then we're always going to have a terrorist issue from that country. It's a matter of fact. So that's what we focus on. We work for the UN, we work for the US State Department in areas where it's seemingly endless wars continue to happen. And unfortunately, wars continue to be started.